So you're interested in undertaking a systematic review, and so today we're going to talk about briefly a common issue that confronts many reviewers, and that is the difference between a systematic review and a meta-analysis. Often you find that people use these two terms interchangeably, a systematic review and a meta-analysis, when in fact the two terms mean entirely two different things. Let's start by talking about what is a systematic review. A systematic review is the process. It's the process of you setting a question, coming up with your criteria in terms of your inclusion-exclusion criteria based on your PICO or PICOT. It's the process of finding the literature, selecting the literature, critically appraising the literature, and finally synthesizing the literature. So think of systematic review as a process. Meta-analysis, on the other hand, can be one outcome of a systematic review. So a meta-analysis is basically a statistical process of synthesizing findings from many studies which all investigate a similar issue. So you might ask me, why would we do a meta-analysis? There are a number of reasons why we do a meta-analysis, but the main ones are, firstly, when you look at those studies individually, those studies may potentially report differing effects from the treatment. For example, you might find one study which reports that the effect from this treatment was say 10%. Another study might report a effect of say 40% from the treatment. Another study might report an 80%. So you as a reviewer will go, which one do I take? In a meta-analysis, you bring all these different effects together, and the meta-analysis gives you the summarized effect from across all those different studies. Another reason why a meta-analysis could potentially be useful is each of those studies by itself may have small sample sizes, which means, and you know that when you have small sample size in our studies, the believability of those results from the studies may potentially be questionable. Therefore, by synthesizing the findings from multiple studies and looking all those findings as a whole, you are addressing the issue of the small sample size. So meta-analysis can be quite useful. Often what we find when we are reading a systematic review is a systematic review may end up in a meta-analysis. In order for us to do a meta-analysis, the data, the studies that you have included, must be what we call as homogeneous. Homogeneous meaning the participants, the interventions, the comparator, and the outcomes were sufficiently similar to combine or bring them together. If they are not, then we cannot do a meta-analysis because the data will be heterogeneous, and therefore we may need to deal with that particular set of data using another way, say a descriptive synthesis. So in order for us to do a meta-analysis, we generally need to have homogeneous data. Now we also need to flag this with you, and that is sometimes a meta-analysis can be done by itself, whereby the reviewers or the researchers may bring together data from other studies and analyze it as a one large data set. Generally speaking, we often see a systematic review which results in a meta-analysis, but don't be surprised that if we come across with a stand-alone meta-analysis by itself. Therefore, to summarize, the difference between a systematic review and a meta-analysis is a systematic review, it's the process. It's the process of undertaking the review, and the meta-analysis may be one outcome of a systematic review.